Today on the podcast, I'm talking with Bo Abrams. Bo is the CEO of Kommu, a trusted platform for apartment sharing. And it's got kind of a unique environment of how he's doing it. He talks a little bit about how they're different than kind of Airbnb or Vrbo, and really geared towards the 100 million kind of nomadic or folks that can work from a remote location. He talks a little bit about kind of some of his insights on fundraising, and really like why LA is such a great place to kind of build a tech company on the consumer front. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Bo just as much as I did. All right, Bo, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the Treehouse. You're now in my Treehouse, so I appreciate that. It's probably the first interview you've ever done in a Treehouse.
I am so excited to try to persuade you to list that Treehouse on Kommu soon.
There you go. That would be good. Well, why don't you maybe give us a little bit about kind of who you are, and then a little bit about what you're doing. I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, so I'm Bo Abrams. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Kommu. Kommu is your trust-based home sharing and travel network. We allow anyone, even renters, to share their homes on their terms with and through the people they trust. So people on Kommu gifting their homes to friends, subletting to friends of friends, swapping, doing trusted pet sitting. It's all this idea that the relationships are what matter most, and we're here to connect people for those days.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, we'll dive into this a little bit more, but I'm kind of curious about like how did you even arrive at this problem? Like, what I'm sure this had some personal commitment, personal problem for you that you probably kind of focused on. So maybe tell me a little bit about your origin story. And I know you have a co-founder, Gus, that you kind of are doing this with.
Yeah, so the origin story really dates back to like when I was deciding to apply to business school. Ultimately, I had worked in finance to start my career out of college. Then I went to a startup to work in operations and really wanted to kind of get more, hands-on with the organization. And sort of at that same time, I had started a nonprofit for a friend who was dealing with some healthcare issues. And I really got sort of involved in the venture healthcare space, which is a longer story. But I wanted to go to business school originally to be in that venture healthcare space. And I think I slowly realized, even through that application process, that I was never going to be really successful there because like I was going to be competing against PhDs and doctors, at those programs. But ultimately, like I was still, deciding that I wanted to go to business school and to work in venture capital. That's all to say, I knew that if I wanted to go to the top schools, I would have to really compete. And to do so would be to have a really amazing GMAT score, which is like a standardized test that everybody takes to get into business school, and to like really stand out on those applications. And so this time, I mean, when I was in high school, like I didn't do any of this. Like I had no tutors, no guidance. I got rejected left and right by all of the colleges I tried to get into. I actually transferred to Haverford. Longer story. But this go around, I was like, I am not going to lose to the people that can afford to like and be. Yeah. So I spent literally all the money I had on GMAT tutors and business school consultants to try to get into the top programs. Of course, I still didn't get in that go around. But no, I was supposed to go back east for business school. So was my co-founder, Gus, which we'll talk about how we met. But at that moment in time, I decided to apply to UCLA round 3, UCLA Anderson, because I'm from LA. So was my co-founder, Gus, who was supposed to go to another business school back east as well, because it was COVID and we didn't want to leave our families at this really uncertain time. And so I got into UCLA, was excited to stay local. And I decided, you know what, I just worked so hard. I just spent so much money. Let me take a trip to clear my head. And I was dating somebody at the time and she suggested, let's go to Whitefish, Montana. And I'm like, I've never even heard of Whitefish, Montana, but like, sure, let's go. And this was right as travel was really starting to open up out of the pandemic. And I remember going on this trip and it was just the best time. It was beautiful. It was like so exactly what I needed. And I remember we stayed and we booked, a pretty crappy Airbnb, and I could only afford 4 nights at that crappy Airbnb. It was more expensive than most of the hotels that I'd ever purchased in my life. And in the same vein, I have this 1-bedroom apartment in LA, which takes up most of my spend and most of my cost of living. And because I'm a renter, I realized that I could not list it on a platform like Airbnb to recoup any value while I was gone. I had to just sit there empty while I was away. And so, really, it was like that thought was kind of just percolating in my mind. Meanwhile, we used Turo to like book a car. And I'm thinking like, man, like if I can use Turo to book a car, like why can't I do that with my house? And the argument would be, well, that's Airbnb. And so that's where the wheels started turning. And so I go to business school. I had no intention of starting a company. Going to business school and going into student debt and then starting a company is like the worst advice. I would, don't do that. Just like that is a bad idea. And I meet Gus, my co-founder, who is the opposite of me. He took the GMAT one time without any tutoring and got a perfect score.
Oh,
Um,
dude.
I know, right? But we were talking about this, that we were actually remote capable workers before the pandemic, and that we had pretty decent paying jobs, and we literally could not afford to travel because it was so prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
And so once the pandemic came and 100 million workers in the US alone became remote capable, we realized there was an opportunity. A lot of that was because we found this website, homeexchange.com. Have you heard of Home
Yeah.
Exchange before?
I have. Yep.
Yeah, so we were like looking into this website, and what we found was, like, first and foremost, Home Exchange for context is a home swapping site. So the idea is people go on there and they could swap homes directly, either for points, like asynchronously, or synchronously, like a direct swap.
Yep.
And we were like, wait a second, like this, if you built this for young people, that's probably a big opportunity. And the reason was because we looked into it. They had $30 million of annual recurring revenue estimated.
Wow.
And they were targeting 45 to 64-year-old homeowners, not those young cash-strapped millennials and Gen Zers that are going to make up most of global travelers by next year, and
Sure.
had a really significant financial need for a platform like that. So we started ideating and testing, and like, I think this kind of speaks to just the entrepreneurial journey, like seeing if there's something that has like legs there. Initially, we called the company Swapped, SWAPT, like
Yeah.
swap apartment. And slowly but surely, like through that iterative process, we found this broader opportunity to essentially build a social network for your home, where, even now we have a home swappers group that is a sub network of a broader platform that we are, really trying to scale at this moment in time. So that's a long-winded answer of how we got there. But ultimately, the idea was we knew that we had to go forward and build this thing. Like, we saw those signs of traction and of life. And I think Gus and I ultimately, what we decided on was, look, it's really scary to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But it would be really dangerous not to go forward and try it, given that we saw the opportunity. Because then, I personally, I think Gus too, we'd be questioning if we're really the people that we want to be, those people that take action and go forward when they see, the potential to build something great that we believe also makes the world a better place. And so that's why
Yeah.
we're here today.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Did you guys get to do kind of the business plan kind of in business school? And so you guys had some opportunity to work together on this kind of common vision while you're going through school?
Yeah, but I will say, like, that was probably one of the most frustrating parts about business school, was that in this case, right, there was a capstone that was great, that like we could like put a team together and work on this business plan. We must have done 7 or 8 business plans in
Oh,
business school, and that was
yep,
maybe the greatest waste of time
yep,
for a tech startup that needs to be
yep,
lean and be iterating and
yep.
experimenting. Um, but it's still very grateful for that process, and it did actually force us to really think, through every aspect of the business. And even, like, building a financial model, like, that's not something I would advise a lot of startups to do in the earliest of stages. But like,
Yep.
it did make us think through every single aspect of the business. I will say, in retrospect, it's about moving fast and testing and iterating and experimenting quickly, and then getting to the point where you have, traction to then talk about a business model in retrospect.
Yeah, I guess the double-edged sword on that one is, I think sometimes the financial model is good to like start getting better at estimating your assumptions, right? Like, I think a lot of times people just don't have any idea of like what things cost, or like what I can charge, or any of that sort of stuff. And so I think maybe most of that gets thrown away because you don't end up using it, but it does kind of ground you in some reality, to go like to this smoke test, did it pass that? And so anyway,
To-
for our
Totally.
founders, like I think that's helpful sometimes.
Yeah, and I will say, I totally think it depends on the type of business that you're trying to
That's
start,
true.
and kind of like, even if there's comparable businesses in the market, right, that you can start
Yep,
to benchmark to, and then
that's
and to
true.
be like rigorous in testing those assumptions. But I totally agree with you. Like, it was a good exercise. I just think 7 business models was maybe 6 too many.
Yeah,
At the
exactly.
but
I got it.
but it was still great.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, talk to me a little bit about your partnership with Gus. You find somebody, which is not always easy, right? Finding somebody, a founder. It sounds like you guys have some overlapping skills and some complementary skills. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about how that relationship kind of came, and then how you divided kind of responsibilities as you kind of stood up the company.
Yeah, I think what ended up happening was, I really, at this in those earliest stages where I was even just talking to people, like thinking about this problem, I met Gus, and it was like just really like a friendship in that, in those initial moments of like just starting in business school, meeting somebody new, and sort of hitting it off and having chemistry. And then, lo and behold, like when you do start to think about starting a company, especially a tech company, it really helps to have somebody technical. I think one of the hardest
Yeah.
things that people struggle to find is a technical CTO or co-founder. So Gus is a full stack engineer who, was a CS major at Stanford.
Oh, okay.
They were probably like, he had worked at Cisco for 5 years previously. And I think there were like 4 or 5 people in business school in general, where like all of the people that were kind of getting an entrepreneurial itch, like me, that had no idea what it was like to build a tech company, were like, that, let's go find one of those people.
Yeah.
And yeah, and while I might not have maybe tons of, let's call it like tremendous skills to talk about in terms of like my direct experience and how it lays specifically to Kommu, I do like to think that maybe a skill of mine was my ability to convince Gus to, to kind of walk away from what would have been a very high paying opportunity to go be a product manager, which is what he went to business school for, to say like, hey, you know what, we can do this. And then ultimately, like I will, like we are really similar in a lot of ways. Like we're totally like, we have a great relatability and like friendship there, but we also have like very distinct differences. Like we always call it like the eagle and the owl, which is just is really reductionist. But like I'm pretty like broad and out there and kind of like have done a lot of different roles and a lot of different things. Whereas Gus, like whether it's technical or not, like his ability to sort of dial in and like really see and find like where there might be like either logical gaps in your assumptions or like even in the business plan where things are just getting lost. Like we really complement each other in that way.
Yeah.
And then ultimately through all of this, like now that we've been essentially working together for 3 or 4 years, I think the best part of our partnership is that like we've been in it through the hardest of times. Like it's this like we've stuck through the ringer and we're still here and we're still enthusiastic about what we're doing every day. And as somebody that worked on the fund, the investing side, like I saw that a lot of companies do go under because mostly the team falls apart. Like somebody loses that belief. And so I think I feel really exactly like I think that like our greatest strengths are that we both take action. We went forward and we just did it. We didn't let the market tell us what to do in terms of like the fundraising market. And that we are still in it, like that we're resilient. And I'm really proud of that.
Well, that's good. That's awesome. So maybe go back to a little bit about the experience. You talked about these 100 million people that can actually, be digital nomads and work in a bunch of different places. You talked about kind of the swap component of it. I signed up for the service. I took a look at what you could find in Brooklyn versus, what you can find in Airbnb, and, dramatic difference, right? Like, I mean, if especially with fees and all the other pieces that go onto it. So I don't know, I'm not exaggerating, but like maybe $250 a night versus probably find something for $80, right? And so that enables people that want to travel, that maybe are on a smaller budget, the ability to do it. But like I think you've had some firsthand experiences where you've rented your place out, you've gone to New York. So maybe just talk about like the firsthand experiences, and then maybe somebody else's, like just other people that have been using it for different applications.
Yeah, I mean, it really boils down to trust and affordability, and this idea that those 2 components really work well when you talk about relationships and the people we know, because the people we know are the people that we trust, and like ultimately that's what we're doing on Kommu, right? So on the host side, you as a host can list your home however you want. Most people are listing their homes for cost, right? It's really this idea that this is not a place like a short-term rental platform for you to drive a profit. And if you want to do that, you should go to Airbnb and register that. But like, there's a reason you need to register that. It's because there's a really tremendous negative effect on local communities when everybody's incentive is to buy up second, third, fourth homes, list them as investment, properties, and try to drive profit off of a stranger. We're kind of saying, well, if that's the case, if that's sort of what happened in terms of that market as it matured, there's this giant gap in donut hole of, nothing that really fits that trust and affordability void, especially for young travelers. Like you either stay at a hotel or an Airbnb and they're tremendously expensive, or you're like at a hostel where you might be sharing a room with a stranger and you might not feel safe. And so when we were kind of going through this process and even pivoting, away from, let's call it the pure swapping model, what we found were that people were like constantly posting on their Instagrams, like, looking for a place, like subletting, prefer to be a friend of a friend. Even when we were a swapping platform, it's like if you and I met on Swapped when we were that, and then we did a swap, like, let's call it South Dakota, to LA. Once this relationship was formed, like once we got here, we wouldn't pay a platform, a transaction fee.
Right. I just knew you got your contact info.
We're going to go direct. And so really it was to say like, oh, if we build this, this model where we actually show people how they're connected, where we're not worried about disintermediation at all because we're not charging any transaction fees, and where we come in and we underwrite for like an annual subscription, essentially, those stays with those wider networks to get people comfortable, to do this more frequently. That is really like servicing what we were seeing in the market and when we were talking to our users in a way that is preferred, creates more value for them as both hosts and guests. So, ultimately in my firsthand experience, like a good example would be, and by the way, there were other issues with, I would call it the swapping model in terms of like asymmetry of dates, like asymmetry
Yeah.
of value of home and things like that. Versus here, like we've really created a dynamic marketplace. And so like a good example for my use case would be, we did the ERA accelerator in New York City for a few months last summer, which was an awesome experience. And so I went to New York. I stayed at a friend of a friend's place for $100 a night. So, and which was right, like their rent was about $3,000 in New York. And I charged $70 a night for my place in LA. And another friend of a friend actually booked my place. So net, I was paying $30 a night to have my own place in East Village in New York City for 4 months. Like you couldn't beat that.
No.
And a lot of what our users find valuable really differs, right? So like a good example is a lot of the women that use our platform were really harping on trust and safety being like the primary driver of why they were adopting. And some of those were our investors and advisors that really are like driving the product forward. And so they wanted to launch a women in travel group where they were the admins of that group, and it was you'd have to apply to get in, and once you were approved, like that was a safe, connected sort of place for women to sort of share homes with women for trust and safety primarily.
Yeah.
And so, and then again, that's like another subgroup where you do have a dynamic marketplace within that, but you're giving hosts and guests the controls about how they want their experience to be and like what their primary motivations are on the platform.
That's pretty cool. And so this kind of brings up, I mean, it's like a social network around the home swapping, get it. And then it seems like the value really is, though, this groups concept, right? Where it's like you can create a group about just about anything, right? You can say it's my first, level connections. You have both Instagram integration as well as LinkedIn. But then, there's maybe a second order and third order people there. And then you can create whatever you want. So if you want to do something that's really specific, you certainly could build something on that too. And so just talk to me about the whole kind of evolution of where you guys started with kind of the groups idea. I mean, I think the social network of like one level of connection that's my direct friend versus the next one, that seems kind of apparent. But then this idea of adding these groups that are kind of specific women only or whatever group that you want to do, that's kind of unique. And I think it can create this kind of ecosystem to what you're talking about for what are you looking for, and then how do we kind of drive you so that you find your kin and that you find home swaps or apartment swaps for what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's really become like the foundation of Kommu.
Yep.
So just for some context, initially, like when we actually were testing for Kommu and like building this, let's call it network of home sharing amongst friends and really friends of friends to start, we pushed live in the App Store. We could talk more about like the learnings of that, but like ultimately we pushed live and went public. And what ended up happening was we realized we had like a big problem, which was like if you didn't have friends on Kommu, the assumption would be like, oh, well, Todd's going to see the value of like building this home sharing network and he's going to invite his friends. He could do that. And like, great. He's like, we just created a lot of value for Todd. Turns out that if you come to an app and you see that you don't see anything on there, even if we explain to you like the value of it, you're not going to go out of your way to invite your friends to this new thing that you don't really fully understand. And it really runs contrary, I think, to like what we stand for, which is this idea of like democratizing your home and not making it like so exclusive and gatekeeping it only for certain friends and people to start. It's really like, no, let's see what happens when we open things up. And so as we were having some issues, like, really fixing that, we were like, well, if you look at what's happening in the market, there are these massive groups on platforms like Facebook and WhatsApp. And then there's massive companies and groups that are, out there that we are really competing with, but we're trying to consolidate into this platform. And what we're saying is like, actually, if you just mimic where those groups already exist on Kommu, and then you add the social component, you essentially let people come in and have this public experience to start, because there are public groups. There are hosts like me listing all of Kommu, and you guide them. You say, hey, by the way, if you do want to control who you list to as a host, if you do only want to, share that availability with specific friends or groups, you can do that, right? But like, let's show you the value up front, which is essentially fee-free social proofing Airbnb for 1/5 the cost, and then show you that there's more of a network effect that takes hold the more people that you do invite and connect with on Kommu. And so that was the big aha moment for us. Like, let's actually open things up, see how people behave in these groups, and then ultimately drive them to more value over time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess, just getting on, and I tried to look through all of my folks on Instagram and in LinkedIn, and not surprising, I'm probably at your right demographic. There wasn't a lot of fit. The question becomes is there an enhancement over time where you start to look at where you're having a lot of communication, maybe in some of these networks, and then basically send those people an invite to it, right? Where it's like, can I tier like the 5,000 people that I have on LinkedIn, knowing that like most of them I don't have a lot of communication with, but there's probably 25 or 30 that I have a ton of communication over the years with and have some longevity. And those are pretty good candidates. And the same thing with Instagram, right? You've got, whether it's family members or close friends, there's probably some, graph where I can start to say, these are the people that would be good to like get onto the platform. And it subdivides this like massive opportunity, which maybe is too much exposure. I don't want all these people swapping homes with, but there's a subset of that.
Exactly. I mean, I think that you nailed it in that the social graph and the ability to do that as seamlessly and as effectively as possible using the data that we have at our disposal, whether that is through integrations and APIs with other pre-existing networks, or actually with the data and the integrations that we're getting ourselves, is the key, right? How do we like make it so that when Todd signs up and maybe does give us his Gmail, does give us his LinkedIn, in the sense that we're telling him, hey, we're not trying to harvest this data in any way. We're
Right.
just actually trying to show you all the people that are
You could.
meaningful connections to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that you will decide if you want to become friends with on Kommu. That's the key. And
Yeah.
it really is this belief that that's actually still a massive, massive opportunity. Like Airbnb kind of harps on this a lot. And really, I will say, like when I think about the opportunity, I think that the amazing team at Airbnb has talked and like validated this opportunity, but they can't build towards it at all because of what they've kind of unleashed from Pandora's box. And that's like
Yeah.
why it's so nice for me and Gus, where we're like, this amazing team and amazing company has like done a lot of the validating and they've created the path for us. But it's this idea that like what really truly we travel to connect, and that it's about higher quality connections now. Like really, we're wanting to move away from these big networks, these Instagrams and LinkedIn's where you're trying to build a following and they have a totally
Yeah.
different utility and purpose. To like, if I can get Todd to have his 40 closest friends on Komu, that's a massive win and a massive network, especially as you start to see how much you all are traveling and how much available inventory is there when
Yep.
you guys just actually centralize that. But then when you do want to open that up to second degree, and even like to these public groups, it's this idea that like even all of Airbnb's 500 million users worldwide are like third degree connected on the
Yeah.
fringes. Most of them are second degree, and that's the beautiful thing. It's like you can have either experience. But getting your 40 closest friends and you just using this for free amongst each other in perpetuity and never even charging each other on Komu, like just because you want to build that network, is the ultimate goal and the ultimate win that we're trying to build towards and reveal over time.
Yeah, that's great. It's a cool vision, and I think it's going to resonate with a lot of folks. You've kind of alluded to a couple times in this conversation already about some of the regulations and kind of what has happened with Airbnb and pressure on local markets and stuff. So maybe just start with giving a little bit more context to that. I mean, you're in it day to day, but like for our listeners, like talk a little bit about how basically just home sharing and like the secondary opportunity for getting income has changed the economics, and then places like New York City are starting to change the regulations, which is creating a little bit of an interesting spot for where do companies like yourself really sit.
Yeah. And let me preface this by saying, like, I really do think that like without these regulations in place, strategically thinking, right, like even if we had this amazing social network that we built for homes and it started to scale, a smart competitor like an Airbnb would try to come in and just say like, oh, we have way more assets and a way bigger team, we're going to try to beat you out of the market really quickly.
Sure.
This is like Porter's Five Forces of business school. This is where maybe once it finally pays off business school. um, but no, ultimately it's this idea that like, look, Airbnb did start as this, right? It was this idea that like people were initially coming online and trying to share a room or share a home to make a little bit of extra cash. And ultimately what Airbnb proved, in my opinion, isn't that we want strangers in our homes, is that we want strangers in our second homes, that we can maximize our profits off of. And
Yep.
so over time, what's ended up happening is like short-term rentals, the entire industry has professionalized. Most of these hosts are now investment management properties. Like there's even like a Blackstone ETF tracking like
Yep.
short-term rental properties. And the effect of that is obviously massive inflation, which is, by the way, tied to the fact that like now that all of us want to travel so much more, like of course prices are going to drive up in that market. And limited housing supply, like in cities like New York, where like it's already increasingly expensive to try to live there as a young person and work there. So these ordinances really came into effect from the cities, like mostly in New York, LA, SF. And the idea was to stop that supply from being bought and listed for, for investment purposes. Like even right now, if I go on TikTok and I search Airbnb, it's a bunch of young people trying kind of like get rich quick schemes where they're doing Airbnb arbitrage of like how to call a landlord and to get their approval to like do Airbnb. And then to like, what it's going to cost to run that, to rent that versus to lease it on Airbnb or list it. So
Yep.
These ordinances really came into effect. I mean, the biggest one was definitely Local Law 18 that passed in October in New York, which effectively like de facto banned Airbnb. And the reason it actually worked is because Airbnb had and Vrbo had lost a suit back in 2016 against Santa Monica, where essentially they tried to claim like, hey, we're just a network. We're not like hotels. We should not be regulated in this way. And the city said, no, you are essentially facilitating commercial transactions, which we totally agree they are. And you should not only be paying taxes like that, like hotels, but you're destroying some of these communities in that way, and like kind of like the integrity of what those communities stand for and have built over time. And so it forced anybody that wants to list on Airbnb, especially in those cities, to then register and adhere to broader mandates and laws. So like there are rules about how long you can list that home for. There's rules about I think there's going to be more and more rules about like if you are in the home at the same time as the guest, and what if even Local Law 18's like you have to have all your doors unlocked, which like nobody's really going to do.
No.
But a lot of that is to prevent this professionalization. Now, Airbnb is doing a lot to fight that right now, and I think if you look back at like what their total supply is globally, like even on the downside of like if there was no Airbnbs in New York or LA or SF, that's like still only 1% of the market that they're tapping into.
Yep.
But beyond that, I think they make a really good point, which is, look, you kick Airbnb out of New York City, what's happened to the average daily rate of hotels? Skyrocketed. Hotels are now worth now $500 or more a night. So what's happening? Everybody's turning back to like these Facebook groups, to posting on Instagram, to texting their friends. Like this behavior will always be there because obviously there's no consumer protection right in that way. Like there's like all of us are like, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to pay $500 a night to go to a hotel in New York City now.
Yeah.
And so Kommu really this was actually where the business plan totally came into effect. And I will now walk back what I said about business plan. Gus and I entered into the largest business plan and pitch competition at UCLA across the law school and the business school called Lowell Milken. And we really dug into those ordinances. And that's where we really like understood why Airbnb was out of the market. And like that commercialization piece really was the through line across those major cities. And we were like, well, wait a second. If we don't charge transaction fees, then essentially like we are not contributing to the commercialization. And if you put that in tandem with all the other startups in the space that are now emerging that are also addressing this in different ways, you ultimately have this kind of wave of companies coming in that inevitably will face regulators one day. Like when you scale and you're creating that value, that's going to happen. But then we get to come in and actually show in our data and everything else, kind of like just what you said earlier, that like, look, people aren't listing their homes for $250 a night. They're listing them for $80 a night. And the reason they're doing that is because they have a right to utilize that asset. That's their most expensive asset and their most expensive cost of living. And so that was the aha moment of like, just by avoiding transaction fees and by preventing hosts from listing for a profit, which we can talk more about that in the grand vision of Kommu, we can show that we don't have that effect. And that is really the key to kind of working with these regulators to show over time that this is actually a good thing and good competition in the market to keep hotels from monopolizing it.
The downside is, you don't have a great place to monetize, right? Like, so that's where Airbnb is taking a cut of every transaction. They have an understanding of what you're paying. You're going through their platform. You're taking a percentage. So today, your platform's free. You've talked a little bit, even in this conversation, about kind of subscription model. Maybe just talk about ways that you think, like over time, these platforms are always tough, right? Because you need a ton of people on it and you need inventory. And then once you feel like you got a critical mass, then certainly the subscription and other monetizations start to kind of fall into it. So maybe talk a little bit about how you're thinking about monetizing this over time.
Yeah, I mean, I will say like definitely like Airbnb drives $9 billion in annual revenue, but ultimately That's transaction fees to get an average of, of a person to take 2 trips per year of those 500 million users, right? And so really the paradigm shift to subscription is this idea that like we all are traveling now more than ever before. Like most millennials and Gen Zers, their apartments are vacant now for like 30% plus of the year. So in that sense, we're saying, okay, if we can create more value by essentially underwriting and providing sort of similar features to Airbnb of like that protection, verification, knowing that, Kommu's got your back when you're doing a stay with somebody that isn't your direct friend. And, that we're doing it for something like $200 a year. Essentially the big, aha moment is like, oh, if I just do 2 nights as a host or guest on Kommu each year, I break even, and everything above that is consumer savings. And we do think that's been proven by even platforms like Home Exchange over time, which, ultimately I was even a member of for like 3 years because I did one home exchange. And then after that, I was like, I'm going to renew this just in case I do one of these trips every year because it's like a no-brainer. And it was 3 years later, I was like, okay, this is not really my crowd. Not really, this is not the platform for me. It's for when I'm 45. So back to the business model, like we think that there is a huge opportunity to essentially take a giant a giant patch of that market share away from Airbnb in that segment. And that's that most of Airbnb's 500 million users are millennials and Gen Zers, but they're not hosting on the platform because they can't. And so we're creating essentially hosts there. We're giving them the one place they can list, and we're doing it in a way that they prefer, which is ideally through people they know and trust and finding those connections. And then on the guest side, really we're marketing this like, and we're saying to those hosts, like, it's got to be like Costco. You have to list for wholesale. And that's really the grand vision here of like saying, and even to the regulators, like, look, we know we have data out there. We can have them upload their leases, whatever it might be, that this apartment in New York City is $3,200 a month. We're not going to let them display it on our network for anything more than that. And hey, hosts, again, if you want to start to play the market and drive up those costs and like, try to profit off of people, you can go register on Airbnb and do that. But that's not what we stand for. And also the social mechanisms of what we've done have already acted as a natural like deterrent in that way.
Barrier to that.
Right. Exactly. It's like we haven't even instituted that yet into the platform. Like you're right, like getting to that scale is in a critical mass is then when you turn that on and you're ready to go. But like so far so good in that people just don't want to rip off their people, people that they know or trust or through, friends of friends. And that's playing out in the market so far.
What about the B2B side of this, right? Like my previous career was working for Concur. We did travel and expense. We were always looking for, kind of alternative, solutions for travel, right? And so, and I did exactly what you talked about. Like I had a guy in Seattle. Once I moved to South Dakota and I was still working in Seattle, I had a good friend. And basically I just gave him some cash every single time I went and stayed in his extra room, right? And so it seems like companies could probably build some of these circles and groups just to do that and basically profit along this, especially startups, right? And especially remote startups.
You nailed it. And so like this is where like we do have a B2B model, and I look at the B2B model like this actually like this venture scale floor of what we're doing in terms of like Gus and I have a lot of confidence each day that like that's a big giant opportunity, even if that was just the sole opportunity of this company on the downside, but it levers us, it gives us the ability to chase that big consumer dream of, bringing online all these primary homes. So I was talking to just for like, I guess, fundraising stories and just, or really, founder stories. We graduate business school in June of 2022, which if for those of you that don't know, started and kicked off the worst downturn in like startup history in 20 years. There's a lot of reasons for that, but ultimately, like it was definitely an intense period for us. And I ended up talking to a lot of founders that I knew and just being like, hey, I worked in VC. I thought we were just going to close so much money so quickly. And go build this product and like really scale it up because of all the work and research we had done. Not the case. But a lot of those founders were seed or Series A founders. And they're like, hey, Bo, try being a seed or Series A founder right now. Like we like to get from Series A to the Series B or C to Series A is an even more Herculean task. And they were hemorrhaging cash and having to cut, a lot of those expenses. But a lot of those companies were B2B and relied on traveling salespeople, especially essentially young people that also had equity in these companies and wanted to see them succeed. And so we came up with this model where we said, like, what if those young people, like when they're going to New York City for a conference or to meet potential clients, what if they stayed with like a direct friend, a first degree connection in a spare room or in that vacant home? Would you pay that friend as a gift, like $100 a night? And all the companies that we talked to, they were like, obviously,
Oh,
like as long as you,
yeah.
yeah, they're like if you save us money and you handle liability and payment,
Yep.
we're game. And then for us, it was kind of this aha moment of like, this solves a lot of our problems. It's a reason to invite your friends. Like, who wouldn't text that to their friends and be like, hey, if we book this on Kommu, my company will pay you passive income for something you probably would have done for free anyways, because we have a
Right.
relationship. We in that model actually do take a cut of what's dispersed to hosts for facilitating
Okay.
that, for underwriting that.
Yep.
And the companies save a tremendous amount of money. Obviously, we think it's really geared towards like seed to series, like VC plus startups. But
Yep.
we have seen like Google built like an internal home sharing network that it's for like intra Google employees.
Okay.
But in this case, we're really the bridge between company, employee, and that employee's personal network that they want to stay with on these trips. So that's why we see a tremendous opportunity there.
I mean, it's cool. There's just a ton of different opportunities, but like maybe talk to me a little bit more about kind of your fundraising. You had some VC backing or some VC experience. You probably were raising at a tough time. So talk to me a little bit about like what went well and what didn't go well for you in that process, right? I mean, do VCs see the concept and the idea and the market opportunity? Is it a matter of proving it out? Like what is it? What is it that basically makes them struggle a little bit with that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. Like, I mean, first and foremost, I will say, like, I literally had seen like hundreds of pitches and like had sourced a deal for the VC that I work for. Like, I definitely was very confident, and I learned. I was like, in the first few months of when we were fundraising, I was like, I look back now and like, what was I doing? I almost like violated every rule. Like sending giant emails with so many
Oh,
details and like you just like look at our deck and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like so
yeah.
that was on me and
Yep.
just learning how to fundraise. Secondly, was like we did have some competitors in the market that we were still competing really effectively against that had raised bigger rounds right as we were graduating school, right before the downturn, and I think this all led to this environment where all of this kind of came together at a moment in time. And the hardest thing about fundraising is you don't really know what the pass is for. It could be for like one of 10 reasons. And without that feedback loop of like,
Yeah.
I know that Todd's passing for this exact reason,
Yep.
the only thing that you can do to improve is volume, in my opinion. Like especially these first time founders, like you just have to do hundreds of pitches and you get lucky maybe early or later. But ultimately, like that's how you solve for the fundraising problem is like just trying and seeing where you're getting momentum and traction. So over that period of time to now, like we have essentially been raising on a rolling basis.
Hmm.
And a lot of that, like there was a fund that came in early and invested in us called SH Capital. And what was great about them was like they helped us kind of build our initial prototype and get to market really quickly. And that was really important for us in that like we knew we were a 2-person team. Gus was the sole coder here. Like I could lock Gus away and say build Kommu in this way, and he would
Yep.
learn it and he would do it as quickly as he can. But strategically, we were like, we can get to market and beat them, those competitors to market and get our product out there and learn faster and then go and scale the team. So we did that and that was awesome. Then through that period of time, like you have to understand that like nobody was doing consumer pre-seed. Like that concept was essentially gone. And ultimately, I will say, like even our traction, like we even today, like I think I'm really proud of our traction and our engagement and our retention. We have like 500 hosts on the platform globally right now.
Yeah.
And it's like almost that traction like works against you to some extent because now you're always being held against that,
Oh, yep.
and so
It's got to go up
so
and to the
that's all
right.
this exactly. And it's like okay, well, we have all these things ready to go. Like even the business model and like the B2B model, like we're closing this round out now, like to turn that on because like that's the utility of and what we're driving, right? So um, that's all to say. Like we got to this moment where really like the data painted the story, and like that's how Gus and I approach it. Of we can have a philosophical debate of whether you believe in me or Gus as founders, whether you believe in the concept. And I can tell you like 30 good reasons to pass on Kommu, but obviously like in that fundraising game, you're looking for those investors that believe in like the potential and the upside of if it does all work out and how we're going to get there and that we're the right team to do it. But ultimately, like, you're just playing a massive volume game until you
Numbers
get to
game.
this point. Yeah. Where you can like point to the data and say, look, actually, you were concerned about engagement and retention. Like, are you concerned that Airbnb only happens infrequently? It's not social. And we're showing that like people that are engaged on our app, which is like literally 1,000 MAUs right now, they're spending 30 minutes a month on Kommu. Like even that Zillow effect of just browsing people's homes, browsing people's
Yep.
trips. And so you're seeing and showing and demonstrating that like actually now we can answer that question. And the more you wait, in terms of that fundraising journey, if you think you're going to get in, the more likely that you're going to miss your chance to come in on the deal at the right time. We did close a VC recently, which was awesome because that was that first domino to really fall in terms of like having a larger institutional fund come in and back us. And now we're looking to close the round and just scale it up. But it's just been a dogfight, but it's been fun too.
Sounds like it. Yeah, it's a tough one. And I think this is like one of the things that most founders like underestimate, the amount of time and the amount of focus that it takes to go do it. My question to you is like, I guess part of what we recommend is maybe doing more diligence on the front end to kind of filter to like, what are like the ones that are maybe a good sweet spot. And then it's like storytelling. You got to like invest before you need the money. And then you're starting to tell them about the concept. You're starting to get a track record. You're telling them the metrics getting better. You're answering their questions along the way. You're building a relationship. And so like that takes time. And it's like, and that's time away from going to build your business. But I think sometimes when you have to do more of the shotgun method where you're sending all this stuff out, you still have to go do all of it. It just takes you a longer time and you have less runway to go do it. And I don't know if that resonates with you at all. I think our fundraising in the Midwest is probably different than the coasts. And it's probably more relationship based and there's probably less of them. So maybe that's easier for us to do. But I'm just curious on like, would that have made a difference? Do you think that's something in the LA scene you could have done?
100%. I mean, I will say like it's kind of like what ended up happening with the GMAT too is that I did get up there and I'm proud of that growth, but it happened over like a year and like it definitely moments where I was like on and off and like burnt out and then going forward and like ultimately if I could have compressed that time frame and really prepared and like known all the information I know today of like what the ideal tutor was, like what the ideal program was for me, and done that research up front, I would have definitely saved myself some time. That being said, like for me, the only way I learned any of that was through trying and like taking the practice tests. Yeah. And so fundraising, I kind of feel the same way of like, you can have the perfect CRM, you can have and flag the perfect investors. And like now, for instance, if I were to go out and fundraise for any other company ever again, I know I would do it 1,000 times better.
Different.
So would every other founder after they go through this. But like at the end of the day, like, preparation is key. Finding relationships and ways in is definitely a huge thing that I underestimated. Like I'm a very social person. Like I have a lot of great, friends and founders that, care about me. I definitely feel like, if I had really just set that up and given them all the things that they needed and kind of run that process initially, that would have saved me a ton of time. And then I would say like, you do want to flag your like target investors. It just depends. Like ultimately, I think in my case, and I think most founders are this way, you still want to like kind of get the early hiccups out of the way and try and pitch. And like, even, a safe way to do it would be to pitch other founders or like pitch people from your accelerator or whatever. But like, it's to say like, that just had to be my case, right? It had to be that I had to go out and maybe I took a couple shots with the funds that I should have waited for.
Right.
And in retrospect, I think the hardest thing is it's like high school. It's like, you keep a lot of funds posted and you send them the updates and whatever. But that impression bias is a real thing. Like I think a lot of people will be, if you met me in high school and you were a senior and I was a freshman, even later in life, like you're probably going to still see me as a freshman. And I'm really like, in the fundraising analogy, I'm knocking at the door like, hey, I'm a senior now. Like, look at like all this
stuff
like,
I've done.
Exactly. So it's really knowing how to take those shots and like when to go to like a top fund that fits the perfect thesis that you're like, that's our dream fund. Find you're in. And know that you're like ready for it, like you believe it yourself. And that's what I would have done in retrospect is like gotten to this point of confidence and then gone out and pitched like the top funds that I wanted to pitch.
Yeah, that's good. That's good hindsight. And it's always easier with a crystal ball, right? If you'd known, you would have done it differently. But I think sharing this experiences so somebody else that's listening maybe can take a look and say, I got to find my own path and I'm going to take a lot of opinions and some other things that people did right and wrong and work from there. So now
and founders want to help. They want to give you advice. Like that's reach true. Out and talk to them, and you'll learn a lot. You'll save yourself a lot of time.
That's true. That's a good point. So you've got kind of this market opportunity. You've built a product. You're getting traction, and now you're getting investment. Like, how do you think about scaling the platform? Like, go-to-market stuff is tough, and like I'm more of a B2B guy than a B2C guy. But like, how do you think about like the work that you do? Like, I listened to an interview you did. And it was awesome to like say, I think you were talking about a trip to New York City and basically just talking to anybody just to try to get them on the platform, right? And so that boots on the ground, like I'm willing to do whatever. Obviously, it doesn't scale. It helps you get you where you're at today. But now kind of where you are from a platform standpoint, like how do you think about go to market now that you've got some money that you can use as fuel to kind of like raise the visibility and really ramp this thing up?
Yeah, I mean, it's you talk about underestimating fundraising, like underestimating marketing and go to market. I think is also the thing that most founders
Struggle
totally
with.
underestimate and don't spend a lot of
Yeah.
time with. Yeah, on and it's like definitely a key focus of what we're doing now. So you're right. Like initially, you have the cold start problem, and like a lot of the cold start problem for marketplaces, right, is initially to say like, well, go get supply first, and then scale demand. And I will say I typically believe most marketplaces have that problem more towards like the seed, like, and that's what they're really
Yep.
raising a seed for. Is like we know now we have supply, like we're gonna go get demand. In our case, like we have supply. Like a lot of these hosts, and they're the most active on our platform, which is amazing because they have a financial need to fill their home with somebody, or they're
And
going
they're
to eat
gone.
$3,000 when they're away.
Yep.
When they're away.
Yep.
And so, really, right now, like it's about finding mechanisms and ways to scale that demand and to do it in a way that is authentic and builds real community, and most likely brings online people that are connected in some way to our hosts and our target users. They're 24 to 35 years old. They're single, or they're in a couple. They have a studio, a one bedroom, or maybe a two bedroom, and ideally one of these major cities. So the way we're approaching that is definitely like we're trying a lot of different tactics. It's similar in that it's throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall and seeing what
Yep.
sticks.
Sure.
First and foremost, it's like what I mentioned previously of just building these groups that mimic the behavior we're already seeing in the market in platforms that are not as good at social proofing and home sharing. So like finding those Facebook groups or those
Hmm.
WhatsApp groups, and where people are explicitly there for home sharing and talking to those users is a big advantage and win for us. And I will say, like, we learned this the hard way too. You can't just go to those groups and like try to poach people.
Sure.
They're very loyal to those communities, which is
Yep.
amazing. But if you just ask them about their problems and ask them like what they're trying to do there, like, and you get on the line with them like this, and you humanize yourself as a founder of like, I'm just trying to learn. Most of the time, they will then go, even if you don't ask them to download Komu, and download it and then love it and then tell their friends about it.
Friends about it. Yep.
Um,
Which is good.
and that's
Yep.
really and that's the trick, right? Is to get to a
Yeah.
point where you are like having that network effect of people and virality of people telling their friends about it. So that's one. The second thing is really building tools then to then allow people to share their homes in those groups more seamlessly, where they would say like, oh, even if I'm posting in a WhatsApp group that I'm a part of, here's my Komu link. You can
Yep.
click this, and now here's my LinkedIn, here's my Instagram. Like here's how you would want to book it, and then making that a great utility and a tool for those hosts is the second thing. And beyond that, it's just like finding different groups and launches and saying like, where can we be most effective because there's a need. Like business school students is a great example. We didn't have summer internships necessarily because we were working on Komu, but like if we did and we had to go to New York and we're paying a 12-month lease, you better believe that like we're trying to find somebody to fill our homes in LA
Totally.
and trying to find an affordable place in New York so that not all of our internship dollars are going to that problem, the double rent problem. So that's like where I've been trying to like try more calculated launches and finding like different strategies to say like, how do we capitalize on those opportunities where this would be a really great solution for that. And I will say, like, I definitely always had trepidations about the doing things that don't scale. Like I was always in that camp of like, well, how do you scale? Like
Yeah.
this is the problem, is it not? And the doing things that don't scale, like every host that onboards like has an opportunity to just like click a Calendly link and talk, just meet with me and just talk for 15 minutes. And like, not only have I learned more by doing that than anything else that I've done, but I've really felt like it's helped us build this organic, authentic community where those hosts, they're like, okay, you know what? This company, they're trying. They have this problem. They're not just two greedy people that like wanted to
Right.
go get rich off an idea. Like they're solving their own problem. And yeah, is it perfect? No. Like they're learning and they're growing and they're doing everything they can to move this thing as fast as humanly possible. I'm gonna go to bat for them and tell my friends about it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a part of this company with them and evangelize it. And that has been like the greatest catalyst to our growth, in my opinion, because it creates an environment where people are encouraged to invite their friends and their networks on for uh, you know something that creates value for everybody on the platform, hosts and guests alike. So do all those things that don't scale, even when you scale. Like keep going and doing that as much as you can.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think some of the things I hear in that is authenticity, right, and trust, and so there's a bunch of things that even in your marketing that you really can kind of replicate, right? And I think this is always the problem with startups where the founders have that, but can you translate that into more employees, to your marketing, to your messaging? Um, and so I think you've got it, and you're practicing it. The question is then, what are the tools that help you scale it to like these markets that maybe are under a lot of regulatory pressure to start with? and then expand from there. But it's awesome, and it's a cool story. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I think that's the fun challenge, figuring
It
that
is a
out.
fun challenge. Yeah, yeah. So let's turn a little bit. We always hear about the Valley and San Francisco and stuff, but you hear more and more, especially on the consumer side, of what's going on in LA, right? I mean, you got Snap, you got Tinder, you got Headspace, you got Riot Space, you got Service Titan. I mean, you got a lot of stuff that's going on from a technology standpoint. So you got better weather, no question about it, than the Bay. And so what's starting to happen there in LA that's basically creating kind of a catalyst around kind of consumer brands?
It's so funny you mentioned the weather because Gus and I always joke, and I went to undergrad back east. He went to undergrad in the Bay, and we're always like, "Oh, that's why there's so many great companies from the Bay." It's like it's so
You have to
dark and
work.
gloomy that like
You have
all
to
you can do
work.
is build. It's so beautiful here in LA that like I got to go outside.
Let's go to the beach. Yeah.
Um, exactly. No, I think the beautiful. I'd love this question because I am of the belief that like for instance, there's some accelerators and some VCs and whatnot that are like, you've got to be in the city, if we're going to invest in you and like and innovate there, which makes sense I think economically. But I'm definitely like, technology is this democratizing, connecting force across the world. It's this idea that you can be in rural South Dakota and build a massive, massive company because it doesn't require that you have a ton of physical infrastructure and people boots on the ground consistently in a factory.
Yep.
Definitely, though, you're right that these pockets of culture have kind of been created where like New York is really like fintech and in the Bay is like obviously Silicon Valley and these massive, both B2B and consumer companies. But LA definitely like is, in my opinion, the consumer capital of the world. I think we are leaders when it comes to like sort of setting the tone and the culture of like what consumers want, because definitely in vain, but like truly like LA is obsessed with that. Like it's
Yep.
obsessed with trying to be the leader there. I think New York has a lot of that too. And so yeah, you're exactly right. It's like it's definitely a self-fulfilling prophecy. You see these companies like Honey and Snap and Service Titan, right, coming online, and then more and more obviously founders flock to this environment. A lot of the investors are focused on consumer companies that are headquartered here. And so it's becoming more and more of that place. And I think even with like Amazon and Netflix and all those media and entertainment companies kind of turning more into technology companies, you're going to see more and more of that. That being said, like if we've learned one thing, I mean, we're building a company that's predicated on the idea that you can't work and live anywhere. Like obviously we're LA founders. We want to be the next great company out of LA, but also like we don't want to just be known as an LA company, right? We're trying to be a company that's about connecting the world. So they will know we're from LA, but they will not know, we don't have to be, the next Service Titan or Snap per se.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Well, Bo, I'm going to wrap this thing up. I really appreciate the time and the candor. It's just a cool opportunity. It's a cool story. I appreciate you sharing it and some of the good things as well as the things that didn't always go well. So your humility and authenticity certainly came through. If people want to learn more and basically connect with you, like how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to learn more, you can definitely check out our website at gokommu.com. So that's KOMMU, like community. .com, our Instagram and TikTok handles and all that. They're also Go Kommu handles. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can definitely ping me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Bo H Abrams on Twitter. You can DM me. Again, happy to chat. I love what you're doing here, Todd, in terms of like really helping founders find their own way and feel empowered to go build companies and try things. And so I've definitely relied on founders to get to this point, and I'm happy to talk to anybody that has any questions about anything when it comes to trying to build a business.
Okay, well, that's great. That's very generous of you, Bo. I appreciate it. So thanks again, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. If you enjoyed the podcast today, please just take a moment to rate it or comment on it for us. This feedback really helps us, and it helps us get the word out to helping other entrepreneurs and founders. Thank you.